Hello and welcome to this special episode of the Career Success Podcast. I'm Jason Connolly. In this special episode titled How to Develop a Growth Strategy, I'm joined by Jan Cavelle. Jan is the author of Scale for Success, published by Bloomsbury, out in the UK, but it's due to come out in the next few weeks in both the USA and Australia. Jan is an entrepreneur from the UK who has a few decades of running micro and small businesses behind her. She is very familiar with all the challenges that go with that, having started one from her kitchen table when her children were small and she was a single mother, to go on to build that into a multi-million pound turnover business. The book is aimed at helping entrepreneurs to grow their businesses during the big leap of 1 to 10 million. Jan, thanks for joining me on this special episode.
Jason, it's lovely to be back chatting to you. I really look forward to it, and I'm looking forward to sharing my experience and wisdom with your listeners.
Thank you so much. And that's a great point. Jan joined me in season 2 of the Career Success Podcast, where we totally went into your background and we went through it all. But the purpose of today is to talk about how to develop a growth strategy. And your book ties so nicely into that, Scale for Success. As I said, it's published by Bloomsbury. Just to give a brief description on the book, and we're going to unpack that in this episode, it says, all it takes to start a business is a great idea and initial funding. But when it comes down to growing and scaling a business and turning it into an enduring success, it becomes much more difficult to manage and sustain the various elements that are involved. You need to set out a clear plan, sustain funding, optimize marketing opportunities, and develop an effective team. I know, Jan, all too well from my own business experience, it's not easy to scale a business. But before we kind of go into the meat and bones and the real topic, tell us a bit about you and kind of your experiences in brief for people that haven't come across you before.
Absolutely. No, I found it very, very hard to scale a business. I mean, I did get it up to, as you say, to the multi-million point, but I got completely stuck and had all sorts of problems at that level. And I found talking to other entrepreneurs, because I'd grown quite fast and I'd been a member of a high growth business club. And I found the more I talked to other people that actually this is the sort of stage of business that people do get very stuck with. It wasn't just me, as I assumed that I was hopeless and no good at all, as we all do. It actually is a thing in business, but it's a really big transition. So much so, one entrepreneur said to me, if you can scale to, I think, 5 mil, she reckoned, you can scale to 200. So it's a, which of course, when we set out and get overexcited, and goodness, wasn't it exciting to reach your first 100,000? You can't conceive that it would even be feasible, or you could do that big leap at all. But you can.
And it really is, Jan, when you think about scaling a business from 5 to 20 million, to a lot of people, sound really difficult to do that. But there is big changes involved in kind of getting a business from those milestones. And I've spoken to a lot of people who've said, getting a business from that 2 to 5 million is incredibly hard.
Yeah, it is. It's I think it's as hard, if not harder, than starting one up, actually. And part of that's because you don't often expect it. We sort of drift into growing a business and it staggers its way up there or rushes up there, depending on how you've done. And very few people tell you that it's going to be monumentally different and you're going to have to do very different things to succeed. Whereas startup, there's loads of, we be careful about this and do that, but they don't talk so much about the problems with this scale up, and why it's not always a good idea to do it, actually, even.
Why do you think it's not talked about as much?
I don't know. I think, I mean, of course, you've got to bear in mind that, goodness, I should remember the percentages and be all smart for you, Jason.
Oh, no,
But,
not at all.
there's incredibly small percentages of businesses get to over 10 employees. So,
Mm.
it's a problem that affects very few businesses in essence.
It's very difficult. And there's a big strain on the person that I remember myself when I started my business, kind of getting it to that sort of size, the amount of weight you start carrying on your shoulders as well when you start getting to 10 plus employees. It's kind of funny looking back at things now. I'd almost think, I would have done so many things differently.
Mm,
What do you think kind of are the real sort of pivotal points of getting the business from that kind of 10 person, or, we can talk
yeah.
about it in
No, I know
revenue
it depends on
terms.
the sector and everything else.
Yeah. Well, what do
I
you
agree.
think are the mechanics of, what, one, why it's difficult, and two, what the challenges are?
Right. Well, I think it's difficult because you're creating a separate entity, at under 10 people, give or take. And when you're starting off, you've got a small team, everybody knows what's going on, you're all having great fun, hopefully, if you've got a good startup and a creative startup, and it's all fairly flexible. And, like I say, everybody's having a good time. When you go over that point, all of a sudden you start having to be working with people you don't know as well. You're talking about bigger finances, you're talking about systems, but most of all, you're creating something that's got to stand alone without you. And that may be something that you're not going to enjoy. It may be something that's not half as profitable. And my first piece of advice, and I don't know if we'll have time to get through all of them, but I've got seven for you. And my first piece of advice is to work out what risks are involved for your sector as to whether that business is going to survive and how much money it's going to make you and whether you really want all that hassle. Because if you've got a really nice, profitable little business, are you sure
Mm,
that, other than people saying, oh, it's a good idea to grow your business, are you sure that that's actually what you want to do? Because unless you've got a
mm.
great exit plan, it may well not be worth the risk.
And I think you make that's such a valid point, and I do want to sort of talk about these points, but I'm also conscious I want to get through all seven of them. But when you kind of, and I found this, when you kind of get your business to that 10 mark, and then you decide, yes, I'm going to scale this up. A lot of the time, you're not seeing any reward from that, because you would have got the business to that point, and then it's making a fair amount of profit, of which you exit. But I think the moment you tend to go into that, right, I'm going to plow this forward, and I'm going to take this business to the next mile. So the profits are all going a lot of the time back
Yeah,
into reinvesting. Then you're not seeing it. And then I think you make a really valid point there about kind of, what is someone's motivation? What is the exit plan? What are they actually working towards if they're not maybe seeing that reward now?
absolutely. Got to be more than it's a good
Mm.
idea. It really has.
And when you're sort of thinking about it, then, so from your kind of perspective, it's about sort of really kind of getting the business to maybe a point where you're making a decent profit, and then maybe, having a roadmap, or, having those kind of conversations where, maybe with trusted advisors, or.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to be, if you're going to scale up and take all that risk and change the whole thing, you've got to be thinking about an exit one day, because otherwise you're not going to last forever in the nicest possible way. Just on stamina. In big corporates now, it's recognised that they all pack off all their senior staff for 6 months sabbatical at 10 years. Jolly nice too. But there's a reason for that. People go stale, they get tired, they get burnt out. And so what are you going to do? Scale
They
it up
lose that
and
passion that got the business to
yeah,
where it was.
it's not going to
Mm.
last. So, you're going to have a plan to get out of there, or at least to have an option to get out of there. Don't take on all that extra work, all that extra stress without having that. It's
And I
just
think a lot of
pointless.
business leaders are on that kind of, chasing, running, 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 and they can't see a way out. And then, that's where a lot of leaders, start to
Absolutely.
run into a whole array of problems.
No, well, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that's a great way to start the how to develop a growth strategy. Point number two, Jan.
Point number two is your market. Again, you don't want to go to all that effort and expense if the market actually isn't going to provide you with work. And the best place to find out about that is by talking to your customers, because one of the traps people fall into is thinking that they know they've got this fantastic product and it's selling really well and it's going to go on selling really well. And actually, your opinion is worth tiddly squat. I was looking for a nice expression there.
Well, I think that summed it up beautifully.
It is your customers' actual viewpoint of the market and of your place in it that matters. Ask your customers, how you're doing, how your competitors are doing, what are your strengths, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses? Could you steal that bit of a market because of their weaknesses? What is your differential? Are you standing out enough? And, what are our other pain points? Are there other bits of a market that aren't being tapped that you can develop? You've got to be sure you're going to have enough business to make it worthwhile to go to this effort.
I totally agree, and I think a lot of the time people might also fall into the traps of being so consumed within their own business that they're not, maybe as they might think they're awake to the world
Yeah.
outside, but actually you're not. And I think a lot of the time, well, there's many businesses we can look at. We could use Blockbuster as an example. They didn't catch on quick enough to
Oh,
the
what a
world of
tragedy that
streaming.
was. Yeah, all
Well,
that
it was.
brilliant marketing. Yeah,
It was, and I think that's a really valid point. I think you've got to be looking at outside of what other people are doing and make sure that the product's relevant. And normally, if you listen to the customers, I tend to find that the customers can be quite vocal, but it's about giving the customers a platform to talk.
definitely. Definitely.
Great. Let's we're rattling through these now, Jan. I'm feeling like we're on a roll. Let's go to point number 3. I think it's so interesting.
Okay, point number 3 is your actual strategy, because one of the big traps that myself and lots of other people fall into is they just go on growing because hopefully they've nailed their sales or the market's very suitable or they're in a fair wind, and so up they go to this point with no idea of what they're doing or where they're going. And while you can do that in the early stages and it's all fantastic and, goodness, I've got a sale today and this is so exciting and, oh, wow, we're showing a profit today and that's even better. When you get to scaling up, it's a different ball game altogether. It has to be pre-planned. And there are lots of reasons for that, but you have to, which we'll go into because they're sort of covered in the rest of the points. But that takes time and much more time than people realize. And if you go up too quickly, you won't be able to sustain it. So,
Hmm.
what's worse, saying, okay, I will do this in 18 months' time and I'm going to take time to plan it, or doing it and having to go backwards?
And it's about kind of moving at a pace that it isn't kind of rushed.
Yeah,
It's kind of I just don't like using the word organic because what does that really mean? But it's got to be at pace. Is there kind of a point where you could identify that maybe it is moving too fast, or is that kind of quite individual? Or
I think, you start to sense it because things start going wrong, really. You find that things aren't in place, be it the systems or the clients or customers start complaining, or you're constantly overworked, or all those things. Life becomes a nightmare, and that's the
mm.
biggest alert you can possibly
And
notice, I think.
that's must be a really, that's a difficult situation to be in. If you've kind of accelerated, you've got a client base, but then all of a sudden you can't keep up with what's going on,
Absolutely.
and then you have to rewind, and you can't keep up with current demand. Then
Yeah.
that is a very
Terribly
bad
difficult
situation.
position to be in. I mean, one of the people I spoke
Mm.
to in the book, and actually who's a very dear friend of mine, and she was lovely and honest, and she said she made exactly that mistake. That she grew their now hugely successful business, too fast, and actually had to deliberately cut that growth in half to go back again and rebuild it properly.
And I bet that took her quite a significant amount of time. She could have got to that place that she is now a lot quicker had that.
No, I mean, you have to be really tough to do it, because the
Mm.
tendency is to try and keep going and it'll be better tomorrow.
Yeah, because I think we're kind of programmed as business people to think that a step backwards is a failure. So to kind of brush
Absolutely.
yourself off from that, and so actually no, this isn't a failure. This is just it's not gone right, and we need to go back in time and make sure that the offering is right. That takes a certain type of person as well. You've got to have a certain type of resilience to take that, and especially if you've got a whole team looking at you. The last thing a lot of leaders want to do is to be looking like that. It's not working, and they're having to go backwards. People only want to seem to go forwards. Well,
Absolutely.
naturally.
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, she is pretty exceptional.
Great. I think that's a really valid point. We shall move on. We're doing a whistle stop tour through scaling for success.
Excellent. Right, so you're planning and getting into the nitty-gritty of the strategy now. What you want to do, and you really do want to get out your paper and pen here, is you need to work out at the beginning and through the early stages of that strategy exactly a jigsaw puzzle or a map or however you want to sort of visualize it of, you're aiming to go to 5 million or 10 million or whatever it is. What are you going to need to do that? How many salespeople are you going to need? What production are you going to need? What website are you going to need? Very important. What management are you going to need? Because you're used to everything being reliant on you. You're not going to be able to do it at 5 or 10 million. You're going to need replacement yous. You're going to need mini me's, really. At least a right and a left hand. And all these things you want to work out what you could possibly need at 5 million and what you could need at 10 million, and give yourself some leeway to that, because that's going to be the roadmap to take you there. And you're going to drip feed into that all the things you need, and it's going to be all costed out. And don't take it to your accountant to do, because there's a grand default in so many of us of thinking, oh, that's the accountant's job, or don't really like maths, or whatever. But if you don't know this bit backwards, and it's not put into sense for you really understand, then how on earth are you going to control it?
And I think the point that you make there about an accountant is a hole I fell into. I assumed when I started my business, and I assumed that the accountant was almost like a business advisor, and they were going to give me kind of everything that I needed in order to help me grow my business. And what I had to learn the hard way, that actually the accountant was an accountant, and really, what I was doing was mistaking an accountant for a finance director.
Yeah, an easy mistake to make, and an awful lot of them want to be exactly that, because it
Mm.
jacks up their fees and everything. Oh, I've never said that. Of course, I didn't say that. But
You say it, so people, hopefully, no one will make the same mistake, because I made that mistake, and I can't tell you the amount of money that it cost me
yeah,
making that very mistake myself.
absolutely. And of course, they're not in your business every day. I mean, they can read a certain amount from the books, but they can't know as much as you do about the business, which is why it's so important, that you actually do the estimations of what it's going to take in the
Mm,
way of all the resources and everything else to
mhm,
put out double or triple what you're doing at the moment. They're not going to be able to tell you that as well as you can. How on
mm.
earth could they?
And I think it's a lonely place when you start a business. I remember myself. I was in no way, anyway, clued up about finances, but I wish I'd followed my gut feeling sooner when it came to my accountant, because I knew it felt to me that I wasn't getting what I needed. But then I was almost too scared to leave the accountant, because you kind of lean on that. Oh, they're the person
Yeah,
that do finances, and moving accountant seems like such a massive thing. But I think again there's probably another listen. If it doesn't feel right, change it. And I think especially when you're starting that business and you're trying to get those key advisors in place, you kind of feel like it's almost like a crutch in itself, isn't it? When you've got one and you think, oh, maybe it isn't the right person, but it's a bit lonely up here at the top.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I couldn't
Mm,
agree more.
mm,
But it just is one of those stupid things. They want to keep this mystique, but they're the only ones who can do the financials. So
mm,
much so, and this is a really unorthodox piece of advice, but I mean, this is something I did, which is I found an accountant who would bear with me while I sabotaged all the coding on my accounts program, so that all those fancy words of receivables and overheads and what have you, and I could break them all down, so I knew exactly what was going on and in common English.
mm. Well, exactly, and I had the same thing myself when trying to reconcile the accounts. It was, I must admit, direct expenses. I was thinking, well, I just don't know,
No, I
what's
want to
going
know
on here.
exactly what direct expenses. You
Yeah,
know, has the electricity gone up this year? How dare they? You know.
I'm laughing because it's so, I've been there and I've done that, and I felt exactly the same way. Let's move on to the next point, Jan.
Okay, so you've got your roadmap of what you will need at all the different stages. And, you know, you very rightly mentioned people at the beginning, and people will be part of that roadmap. And the more senior the people, the longer it will take for them to get up to speed. Because, I mean, if you're looking at a right hand and left hand man or woman, she says quickly or whatever, they will need to know as much or 99% about as much about your that business as you do. Now, you've probably had X number of years experience of that business by now. They cannot, it's not like teaching somebody to make the tea. They cannot come in on day one and actually be up and running with that amount of knowledge. They
Mm.
may know the job from somewhere else, but they will not know the company. So you need to build in time for them to get that familiar. You need them on board early, the more senior they are. So that's got to be
Yeah.
built into your costs.
How long is too long?
Well, you know, the thing
Or
is
am I
that
asking the unanswerable question? I don't know.
well, yeah, I view it a different way. You know, I think if you leave it too late and you panic hard and you get the wrong people, they can destroy your company for you. You know, so the fact that you've allowed an extra 2 or 3 months leeway either side, and then maybe sort of 6 weeks, 6 months for them to be up to speed, you know, that may cost you a bit, but if they're the right people, they're going to pay for it.
I agree with that. I think that's a really, really valid point as well, because uh, again, I keep going back. I think I established this in the first episode, Jan, that we did together, that we had a lot of similarities. But there is nothing worse than making a panic hire, and then the problem when you make a panic hire is because you're panicking, the workload is too much, and actually, even if you hire the right person when you leave it too late, then you might make the mistake of thinking that person isn't right, but it's just because you've chucked them into the frying pan.
Possibly that's very charitable and very nice of you, Jason. Yes, that is possible.
Yeah. So, and with the roadmap, because I think this is, and I know we're sort of reversing back on one point, but this is just kind of coming to my mind, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to be thinking about this. How do you know yourself if the roadmap is realistic, and how do you, when you're sketching out this roadmap, I'm guessing it's obviously every business there needs to be a level of fluidity, but is it something that you would suggest that someone reviews at certain times of the year, and how do you manage the roadmap? Because I imagine it's not like a typical road. The road probably changes and has u-bends in places you never thought it would have, sharp
Lots,
corners.
yes.
Yes.
Absolutely, and that's why I was suggesting that you actually, you know, sort of go for, say, the whole 10 million for the sake of argument if you want to get really adventurous and exciting, you know, but you break it in down into stages, you know, so you might go up from even your 500,000 to your first 1 million to, you know, then 2 million, then 5, then 10, so that you can recombulate the entire thing, you know, during those stages and adjust all the time without doing too much damage.
And I guess there's sometimes when you do the roadmap, and then you might realize that actually the roadmap isn't right once you've started it, and it needs to
Yeah,
and it needs to be different.
definitely. You know, if you're only looking at the leap from 1 to 2 million for the sake of argument, you know, then it's not the whole lot gets damaged because you can adjust things in that
Mm.
phase, not the whole caboodle.
I guess what's really the most important point, and this is what I'm kind of taking from what you're saying, is that yes, there's going to be twists and turns in different ways to get to the end goal, but the real important thing here is making sure that you once you kind of say, right, okay, I'm going to go to that point, you need to be prepared to go to that point.
Yes, I think you do. And I mean, if you absolutely can't, you can't. But because it's got to be worth it. Because you're gonna, you might need funding, and we'll talk about that in a second. You might need to hire people. You've got to be pretty convinced before you take all that on that there's a good reason for that. Yeah, but you're going to
Mm.
put yourself under a huge amount of stress, strain, and ambition, and late nights, and all the things that go with it. However much anybody promises you that it's easy,
Mm.
and yeah, you're going to want to get there.
Yeah, really, really valid point. Let's move on to the next point, Jan.
Okay, well, my next point is cash, and this is very much dependent on sector. But if you're going to look at more people, more expensive people, particularly because all those late nights you do are probably free, but curiously enough, somebody else's are not going to be. And
True.
so your people costs alone are going to soar. If
Mm.
you're lucky and you're in a sector where you can bootstrap, fabulous, because I think there's so much to be said for it. Not least that you're going to hang on to the whole thing at the other end. But and all you're going to get all the benefits of it, and it's more resellable, and so many things. But if you can't, you can't. You're going to need some sort of funding, and
Mm.
that also, going back to our roadmap, is going to take a while to be put in place. I mean, it's you're looking at so many choices now, be it going to VCs or crowdfunding or whatever, going through any investment process, but the chances are it's going to take you 18 months, and you're going to need to have a sort of stage system. There's no point in raising the funds you need for 10 million to get to 2, but you
Mm.
want to be fairly sure that you're going to achieve them and show a smashing grip record and be able to trade up and have the justification for asking for the next lot, and do such a smashing job that hopefully whoever's given you the first lot are going to biting your hand off to reinvest.
Have you got kind of any advice that goes kind of hand in hand with funding? If someone's trying to think, what avenue do I go down?
As to which avenue, I think that's very dependent on you. As I say, best of all, bootstrap it and do it, through sales. But some sectors are easier to do that in than others. I think you know there is this huge choice now. You get it's still a big, apart from crowdfunding, it's a big question of who you know. And that's the great win with accelerators, I think, is you make an awful lot of contacts. It's not so much what you learn now, that they have a higher chance of rate of success or anything else. It's you do actually get to pitch to the right people. Again, it depends on how much early money. We're only talking sort of almost family and friends round at this stage. You could probably well, you could always try a family and friends round, but a crowdfund or a VC who seed invests is probably a good bet at this stage.
Okay, it's really interesting. I'd like to say that I've kept count of the number of points and where we're up to, but I'm going to be honest in a bit that I've lost count because I got
I,
so
I,
into what you were saying.
I'm relieved to hear it, to be honest, because I noticed checking my own list that I had two number threes, so it's actually 8. Not a good sign, is it?
No, 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 that's absolutely fine. Number 7.
Indeed, yes. Number 7 is systems. I was talking to somebody about this, oddly enough, earlier, who was clearly much better at systems than I am. Systems are one of those things that entrepreneurs do not like doing. It's not their idea of heaven. Their eyes glaze over and they want to leave it till
Mm.
tomorrow. But it's one of those things equally that the sooner you do it, the easier it is. Because as you scale up, it's the nightmare job to try and introduce it when you're already established, doing what you do, to try
Mm.
and put back information in, to try and train people who are already flat out on some system. It's just hopeless, and you can't scale and get bigger without systems because people need to know what the best way to do things is. Not
You need
not Severid's
processes.
dictatorship,
Yeah.
but
Mm.
and a guide.
And I think that's a really such a valid point. I think that you want to try and get those systems in as early as possible, because once you've people have got a certain way of working,
Yeah,
every time you introduce something new, it's not easy to introduce new systems. It's very, very difficult, and I think that that's often something that seems to be overlooked. And then someone goes, "Oh, we need that in place," and then I can imagine the logistical nightmare of trying to get a system in place once you've got so many staff. So um,
absolutely.
and I think that I was quite fortunate in a way that I'm a very systematic person. So
Are you? Yeah,
yes, I am. So I think for me, I've always been very in tune with the system way of thinking. But again, I think when it comes to scaling, in my experience, there needs to be processes in place, and
that do.
there needs to be a clear structure, and all of these things. They sound easy to put in, but it's not. It's
They're
really, really
time
difficult.
consuming.
They are time consuming, and you're exactly right in what you're saying, Jan. They're not the sexiest of jobs. An entrepreneur does. I don't think it's something that excites a lot of people. We need structure. Even the word itself, structure. It's
Oh,
not a word that you would associate with one of the more fun jobs.
no,
So
absolutely. I mean, for what it's worth, on systems, if you really, really hate them, there's somebody I know who's an Australian entrepreneur, but called David Jennings, and he's written a book called Systemology.
mm,
And he's sort of created all the systems you'll ever need for business, but in a very straightforward way. But he also advises you to set it up so you do your ideal flow, which he would explain in the book, and I won't go into because I've got one more point to do. But and after you've done a little bit at the beginning, essentially you find somebody else in your organisation to do the lot. So that might sound very good to
mm.
somebody.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing to realize as well. I think an entrepreneur, one person, isn't going to be great at everything, and it's
Yeah,
about trying to fill those skill gaps of where of the skills you don't have. Like there's lots of skills I don't have, and I'm all too aware of what those skills are, and it's about finding people to plug those gaps. So let's move on now. I've caught back up counts with where we're up to. Point number 8.
yes. That and oddly, if that sort of fits well, really, with what you were just saying about our strengths and our weaknesses, because firstly, I so agree with you, and I think there's an absolute tendency with us entrepreneurs to think we ought to be super people, but you know what I mean, and we can't be. We will be good at some things and bad at others. Plus the fact that, as you equally rightly say, it's incredibly lonely. So before you even think about it, you need a really, really good support system in place. And that's
Mm,
at home. It may be a coach if that's your thing. It may be a mentor, which I'd highly recommend. Whatever it is, or a peer group of two or three people who you really trust who are going through the same thing. That works
mm.
really well for some people because you can
And
actually sort of brainstorm together and trust each other because you know the desperate ins and outs.
And
But
I think that's such a good point. I think I remember feeling desperately lonely when I
yeah,
started my business, and every problem lands on your doorstep. You need people to bounce that off, and I think I was very late to the party when it came to getting support. I sort of ran myself into the ground before that was a conceivable option. I think the way my brain was wired at the time was that I need to I solve all these problems, and actually, now the people that I've got in place are the support network. I think to myself, how on earth did I even conceive coping before? So I think that's beautiful. Is there kind of obviously one standout point that you would kind of say to people who are maybe thinking about taking this leap, or they've got a small business and they're just thinking, okay, I'm thinking about going down this avenue. Obviously we've covered a lot of points now, but if there was one kind of takeaway from what you would want to say to people, what would that be?
be sure it's going to make you happy.
And I think what a beautiful I don't think you need to say anything more, Jan. I think that's a beautiful way to end the show, and I think that's very true. If it's not making you happy, then you've got to question why you're doing it.
Yeah.
Well, Jan, thank you so much for joining me on this special episode, How to Develop a Growth Strategy. If people want to find out more about you, or indeed they want to purchase the book Scale for Success, where can they go to?
Right, they can. Book-wise, they can go to all good booksellers, which includes Leaping on their Amazon account. And as you rightly say, it's called Scale for Success. They can find out more about me on my website, which is jancavelle.co.uk. And you can also, which didn't apply last time we spoke, if you leap on, press the button and go on jancavelle.co.uk right now, you can download the first chapter and have a taster and see how you get on with it.
Beautiful. Jan, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute delight to talk to you.
It's always a great joy to talk to you, Jason. I love it.
Great. That was Jan Cavelle, author of Scale for Success. I'm Jason Connolly. This was a special episode of the Career Success Podcast. Until next time, goodbye.